All right, we are on to chapter 7 and the fourth love language, which is acts of service. So this one's fairly straightforward. The idea of giving service to each other, doing for others the service that we would like them to do for us. Now, of course, as soon as I said that, there becomes an immediate complication because if your primary love language is acts of service and your spouse's is not, or vice versa, the what they would do for us can get a little dicey. In order to understand what we would do for the person whose primary love language is acts of service, we need to understand that person, much like the other languages. But it's important to understand that for people whose primary love language is acts of service, this language was probably reinforced very strongly in their own home, which means that right along with the acts of service as a love language comes the stereotypes that they grew up with in their own home. And so that's one of the things that makes the acts of service love language one of the more complicated languages, because in order to do it well, we often have to overcome stereotypes. I remember when my wife and I were newlywed that she got a book about what I wish we'd known when we were newlyweds, and we read through it together. But when it came to the details of figuring out who would do what around the house, I kind of brushed past that section. I didn't take it very seriously because I had the mistaken perception at that time that the roles of the man and the woman were very, very clear, and what you were supposed to do was very, very clear. Of course, I've realized since then that that was just me generalizing what I'd grown up with in my own home to others. And as you go into a marriage relationship, you can pretty much guarantee that there will not be an exact overlap of expectations of who does what. And so this love language kind of gets mixed up in gender roles, in expectations, in assumptions about what people are going to do. And so this is something that in order to understand this one well, we take a big step back and we say, okay, let's look at this concept of showing love through acts of service. So, the scriptural context that I'd like to share for this love language is Jesus Christ as he served his apostles shortly before his crucifixion. On the night of the Last Supper, he washed their feet. This is in John chapter 13. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God and went to God, he riseth from supper, and laid aside his garments, and took a towel and girded himself. After that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. So after he had washed their feet, and had taken his garments, and was set down again, he said unto them, Know ye what I have done to you? Ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that ye should do as I have done unto you. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If ye know these things, happy are ye if ye do them. So in these verses, we see that Jesus performed a service of washing their feet, demonstrating that as their master, he was also their servant. And that's really the approach that we can take for being able to successfully serve each other, successfully show love through this love language of acts of service. Dr. Chapman mentions specifically in the book how our gender stereotypes and how our expectations about what people are supposed to do can interfere with our effectively loving and serving each other through this particular love language. He shared a story of a man who, before marriage, served his wife very consistently and lovingly because it seemed natural and intuitive to him to do. But after they were married, he stepped into much of the roles that he had seen in the house he grew up in. And so he did the things that he thought that the husband was supposed to do, and he expected her to do the other things. And of course, she was quite frustrated because her primary love language was acts of service, and he had quit serving spontaneously like he did before. And so it's very important through this, particularly if either of the members of the couple has a primary love language of acts of service, that you consider what can you actually do to serve them? what will be of help to them, what will lift a load off of them, what will help them understand how much you love and appreciate them by serving them, regardless of what stereotypes there may be around the particular activity. There have been relationships, marriages, where, for instance, the wife just served and served and served and served, and the husband, having the primary love language of acts of service, thought the marriage was wonderful, but the wife was not feeling like things were wonderful in the marriage. She wasn't feeling loved because she had a different love language, and or more specifically, it may be a case of she may have also had the love language of acts of service, but he wasn't directly serving her in a way that was significant and helpful to her. And so he mentions the importance of not having this concept of acts of service cause one of the marriage partners to be a doormat and to not be significant, but rather the importance of both members of the relationship serving and helping each other. In addition to the marriage stereotypes that we grow up with from the home that we grew up in and what roles we saw assumed by our parents, there's also the reality that all men and women are not the same. For instance, you may have a woman that demonstrates characteristics that you stereotypically may associate with a man, and vice versa. And so it's important to consider as we are on this journey to love each other well, to serve each other well, that we learn to consider the reality of who we are in the relationship with, that we learn to consider the unique temperaments, motivations, and desires of the person that we are trying to love. In this chapter, Dr. Chapman gives an advanced tip for how you might come to understand better the sort of thing that your spouse, whose primary love language is acts of service, may be looking for. He points out that in this and in some of the other love languages, the thing that the spouse tends to criticize the most may be the thing that they are most looking for. Now, of course, this is difficult for most of us, myself included, because when a person feels criticized, we're very likely to get defensive. And this defensiveness means that we don't necessarily think clearly. But he points out as you grow in your relationship, as you advance, that maybe you can get to the point where when someone criticizes, you can take a deep breath and you can ask clarifying questions and understand what they're truly looking for. And if you use this method, you have the potential to turn a criticism into a request. And that's the final point to remember in this. Again, agency is critically important. We're talking about requests, not demands. In all of these, if your primary love language is acts of service, like mine is, it's important to remember to request help from your spouse, not demand. Again, by doing that, we honor each other's agency and give everybody the opportunity to truly love. As always, the scripture references and resources I mentioned in this video are in the links in the description.